Hi, welcome to lecture number 1. This is the first content lecture of English 270 for this summer. This lecture is about subjects, verbs, and clauses. These are our basic functional building blocks of sentences. So, what we're going to see is what these terms mean, how they relate to terms you might know, such as verb, noun, adjective, pronoun, that kind of thing, and how they relate to sentences as well. So this is the first of 3 lectures for this week, and in each lecture we're going to get into more detail. So watch this one first, then you'll be watching the head nouns and the auxiliary verbs lecture, and then you'll be watching dependent and independent clauses, and that should give you a pretty complete picture of excuse me, pretty complete picture of clause types and the nuts and bolts of clauses. So these are our terms: subject, verb, and clause. A clause, we're starting with that because that's the biggest one. A clause is a part of a sentence. So we're used to thinking about speech and writing being broken up into sentences. Certainly that's the sort of unit that we see when we start with a capital letter and end with a period. But sentences have internal structure. They're made up of one or more clauses. And that's important to know, that you can have a sentence that is just a clause, but there are lots of sentences which are made up of more than one clause. So, the basic definition that we're using is a clause is a unit of meaning built around a verb. And you'll see in this lecture why that's really important, why this locating the verb at the center of everything we're looking at is the only way we can accurately identify a clause. So every clause has a verb. You can't be a clause without a verb. So the first thing I'm going to be asking you to do in your assignment is identify verbs. And throughout this semester or summer session, I can't emphasize enough how important it is. Look for the verbs first. If you see a chunk of text, and we're working with text in this course, if you see a chunk of text between 2 pieces of punctuation that doesn't have a verb, you're probably not looking at a clause. So for our purposes, you can, at least for this first assignment, you can ignore it. Anyway, more of that later. I've written little things here just to enliven your thinking a little bit. So we think about a clause as being like a mini movie where exactly one thing happens and the verb describes what's happening. So without a verb, nothing happens. When we're talking about happening, it doesn't mean that anything has to change in the course of the clause. A verb can also describe a state, as well as an event or an action. So these 3 words are important: state, event, and action. So the first sentence in the bullet point is describing a state. Jane is hungry. So if we imagine this little movie, Jane's hungry throughout the movie, but we need the verb to describe her state. Other languages can leave that verb out, describing the state, but English always has to have it, or standard English. And I should say, just a brief aside, we're talking about standard written English. There are lots of Englishes that are perfectly valid, that don't look exactly like what I'm going to be talking about throughout the semester, because we're talking about writing. This is a grammar in writing class. Most students who take it want to improve their writing in some way, so that's why we focus on writing. So, first bullet point, Jane is hungry. That's a state. The second one, Jane kicked the ball. So something happens here. It's a much more sort of obvious movie, if you like. It's an event of kicking where Jane does something. In the third bullet point, Jane doesn't do anything, but something sort of happens to her. So Jane received a gift. And that's another kind of action. Jane, the subject, I'm getting ahead of myself. But in each of these, Jane is the subject. She's the thing, the entity, the noun that the verb sort of connects to most closely. So anyway, more about subjects in a second. Got the clause? Super. So every clause has a subject. So as we said, a clause is a mini movie. So you have to have something happen or a state be described in your mini movie. It also has to be about someone or something, otherwise it's a sort of pointless movie. So the subject is the person who does the action described by the verb, the person affected by the action described by the verb, or the person about which the state described by the verb is true. So Jane slept. Jane is the subject, she's the one doing the sleeping. Jane is hungry, she's the one about whom hungry is true. That makes sense? So both of these sentences here don't have any other nouns. I was going to say a whole lot of things then, and I don't think I'm going to, because that's getting ahead of myself. What I was going to say is going to be in the second lecture. So here's your first exercise, and what I'm going to recommend that you do after I've done my talking here, I'll tell you to pause the video. I'm going to ask you to mark the subjects and the verbs of the following sentences, those 3 sentences in the bullet points. So write them down on a separate piece of paper, and then mark the verb. I suggest you underline it and put a V next to it, and mark the subject. So underline it and put an S next to it. Now, one note before you do this: a subject is not always one word. A verb is not always one word either in the terms that we're talking about it. But in these sentences, you've got to look for the whole set of words that you think should be the subject, that are the that describe the thing that this state or event is about. So just a word of warning. Just more than one word is okay. That's why we're doing underlining. All right, so pause the video, do your markups, and when you're done, the next page will show you the answers.